Welcome back to HOA Justice Stories. I thought it would be a warning. It was a campaign. I pulled into my driveway after a 12-hour event shift and saw the tow truck backing in behind my car. Karen marched up with a measuring tape and screamed that my tires were 1 inch over the line, and that counted as a violation. "I am not giving you a warning," she said, waving a clipboard in my face. "This is immediate impound under emergency authority." I work as community event staff, which means I know how crowds and meetings actually work, and I know when someone is making up rules on the spot. I got out of my car slowly, keeping my phone in my hand. The tow operator stood by his truck with his arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. Karen kept shouting about how the Maplewood Commons HOA Incorporated board had already voted to authorize the tow, and I had no right to park in my own driveway because it technically extended into common area by 1 inch. I held up my phone and started recording. She did not flinch. She said the board met 2 days ago and passed an emergency resolution giving her authority to tow any vehicle encroaching on common property. I asked to see the meeting minutes. She said I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. The tow operator shifted his weight and said he needed authorization in writing or he was leaving. Karen pulled a folded slip from her jacket pocket and handed it to him. He glanced at it, frowned, and looked back at me. The truck started making noise. Karen smiled and said, "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." I told the driver I lived here and this was my property. He said the slip showed my address and a board signature. I asked if he wanted to be part of a fraudulent tow. He hesitated. Karen snapped that the clock was running and she would call his supervisor if he refused. I live in Everett, Washington, in a neighborhood where curb appeal matters more than reality. Maplewood Commons HOA Incorporated runs like a private government with a taste for petty enforcement. I moved here 6 months ago because I needed affordable rent close to my job, and my family back home depends on the money I send every month. I cannot afford surprise fees or a tow bill. Karen is Angela Williams, the Architectural Committee Chair, and she has been targeting me since week 1 because I pushed back on a guest parking fine that was never posted as a rule. The tow operator asked if I had a copy of my deed. I said yes inside. He told Karen he needed 5 minutes to verify or he was pulling off. She got in his face and said the authorization was already signed, and if he left she would report him for obstruction. He stepped back and pulled out his phone. I went inside, grabbed my folder, and came back out. By then, 2 neighbors were standing on the sidewalk, whispering while pointing at the chalk marks by the tires. Karen had drawn white lines on my driveway with a piece of chalk, claiming they marked the boundary between my property and HOA common area. I showed the operator my property survey. He compared it to the slip Karen gave him. The slip had my address but no legal description, and the signature was illegible. He asked Karen for a copy of the board resolution. She said it was confidential, and he did not have clearance to see it. He said he was leaving. She screamed that she would have his license pulled. He said good luck and started unhooking his wheel lift. Karen turned to me and said, "This is not over. I will have you towed every single day until you comply with the boundary." The operator drove off. Karen stood there breathing hard, staring at me. She said I had 24 hours to move my car back from the line or she would call a different vendor. I asked what line. She pointed at the chalk marks. I asked if she had a surveyor verify the boundary. She said the board does not need a surveyor, we have the plat map and common sense. I said I would file a complaint. She said go ahead, I run the committee that hears complaints. Then she walked back to her car and left. I went inside and called the management company. They said Angela Williams had been filing violation reports on me for months, but none of them had gone to a hearing because the violations were not valid under the governing documents. I asked if the board voted to authorize a tow. The agent said no board meeting had occurred in 3 weeks. I asked for that in writing. She said she would send me the meeting schedule and attendance logs by end of business. If this story is getting wild, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the chalk line and the fake authorization slip. Angela had committed to a lie in front of a witness and on my recording, and I knew she would escalate because backing down would mean admitting she was wrong. I decided I would not correct her lie publicly because I wanted her to commit to it in public where it would be harder to walk back. I had a plan, but I needed more proof first. The next morning I went to the county assessor and pulled the official plat map for Maplewood Commons. My driveway was entirely on my lot. The common area started 10 feet past my property line at the sidewalk. I made 3 copies and put one in my car, one in my folder, and one in a safe place. Then I drove to work. When I came home that evening, there was a bright tow warning sticker slapped on my window with no readable text, just a big orange shape. I peeled it off and saved it. Angela was standing by the mailboxes with a handheld label maker, watching me. She walked over and said the sticker was my final courtesy notice. I said I had the plat map. She said the plat map is wrong. The HOA commissioned a new survey and it shows your driveway encroaches by 4 inches. I asked to see the survey. She said it is not public yet. I asked when it would be public. She said when the board decides. I went inside and emailed the management company asking for a copy of any new survey. They replied within an hour saying no survey had been commissioned and no survey was on file. I forwarded the email to myself 3 times and printed it. Then I sent a certified letter to the board demanding they cease towing threats and provide legal justification for the boundary claim. I kept a copy of the tracking receipt. 2 days later, I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of a diesel engine idling in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw a different tow truck with its wheel lift extended, backing toward my car. Angela was standing on the sidewalk with her phone on speaker held high like it was dispatch, screen turned away. I pulled on my clothes and ran outside. The operator was a different guy, older, with a beard. I told him to stop. He said he had a signed authorization from the HOA. I said the HOA does not have authority to tow from private property. He said the work order says common area. Angela shouted that I was interfering with official business. The operator said he did not want trouble. I told him I would call the police if he touched my car. Angela said, "Go ahead, they will side with the HOA because we have documentation." I called the police. Angela smirked and said, "This is going to be embarrassing for you." The operator kept working. He hooked the wheel lift under my rear axle and started lifting. I stood in front of my car and refused to move. Angela said I was trespassing on common property and she would have me arrested. The operator said he needed me to move or he would call his boss. I said, "Call your boss, I want this on record." The operator called his supervisor and put it on speaker. The supervisor asked what the problem was. The operator explained the situation. The supervisor said if the property owner is disputing and threatening police, do not complete the tow. Angela grabbed the phone and said the HOA has a signed board resolution and this man is violating CC&Rs. The supervisor said, "Ma'am, if there is a dispute, we do not get involved. You need to resolve it with the homeowner first." Angela said, "Your contract obligates you to respond to our calls." The supervisor said our contract does not obligate us to commit theft. Angela hung up and threw the phone at the operator. He caught it, shook his head, and started lowering my car. The police arrived 5 minutes later. 2 officers got out and asked what was happening. I explained the situation and showed them my plat map and the emails from the management company. Angela said I was harassing her and refusing to comply with HOA rules. The officer asked to see the board resolution. Angela said it was in her car. She walked to her car, got in, and drove off. The officer looked at me and said, "If she comes back, call us again." The tow operator unhooked my car, apologized, and left. I stood there shaking, trying to process what just happened. I called the management company again. They said they were escalating the issue to the regional director and they would schedule a hearing. I asked how long. They said 2 to 3 weeks. I said Angela just tried to tow me again and the police had to intervene. They said they would note it in the file, but they could not stop her from filing violations. I asked if I could get a restraining order. They said that was between me and my attorney. I did not have attorney money. I had rent money and family support money and a dwindling emergency fund that could not handle a legal fight. That afternoon, I went to the gate to leave for work. My access card did not work. I swiped it 3 times. Nothing. I drove to the gatehouse and pressed the call button. A voice came through the speaker asking for my address. I gave it. The voice said my access was suspended pending a compliance hearing. I said I did not receive notice of any hearing. The voice said the notice was mailed. I asked when. The voice said, "Check your mailbox." I said I checked my mailbox this morning. There was nothing. The voice said I could park outside the gate and walk in. Then the speaker cut off. I parked outside the gate and walked home. I checked my mailbox. There was a single envelope from the HOA with no postmark, just my address handwritten. Inside was a hearing notice dated for the next day at 10 in the morning at the clubhouse. I had work tomorrow. I had already used my personal days earlier in the year when my brother had surgery. I could not afford to miss a shift, but I also could not afford to let Angela railroad me in a hearing with no witnesses. I called my neighbor Marcus, the one who watched the first tow attempt. He worked from home and said he would come to the hearing if I needed a witness. I asked if he saw Angela put the chalk marks on my driveway. He said yes, and he took a picture. I asked him to send it to me. He did. The photo showed Angela crouched by my rear tire with a piece of chalk in her hand and a handheld label maker sitting on the asphalt beside her. I saved the photo and backed it up 3 times. That night I reviewed everything I had. The plat map, the emails from the management company, the police report number, the photo of Angela with the chalk, the tow warning sticker, the recording of the first tow attempt. I also had something else, something I had not told anyone yet. The gate system kept an access log. I worked events, which meant I knew how access control systems worked, and I knew the logs were supposed to be available to residents on request. I submitted a formal request that night asking for my access history for the past 3 months. I knew what the log would show. Angela had been manually blocking my access in the system on random days, forcing me to be late or miss shifts, then blaming me for non-compliance. I did not have the log yet, but I knew it was coming, and I knew Angela did not know I had requested it. The hearing was in a small room at the back of the clubhouse. Angela sat at a table with 2 other board members, both older men who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. There were 4 chairs for residents. Marcus sat next to me. Angela started by reading a prepared statement. She said I had repeatedly violated parking rules, encroached on common property, interfered with authorized enforcement, and created a hostile environment for staff. She said the board had no choice but to impose immediate fines and continue towing until compliance was achieved. One of the board members asked if I had received the violation notices. I said no. Angela said the notices were mailed. I said I never received them, and the management company confirmed no violations had been filed through the proper process. Angela said the management company was not involved in architectural violations. Those go directly through her committee. I pulled out the plat map and laid it on the table. I said my property line is here, the common area starts here, and my driveway does not encroach. Angela said the plat map is outdated. I asked for the new survey. She said it was still being finalized. I asked who authorized the survey. She said the board did. I asked for the board meeting minutes. She said the meeting was executive session. I said executive session minutes still have to be logged. She said not for architectural matters. One of the board members shifted in his seat and said, "Angela, we did not vote on a survey." She said it was an emergency action under her committee authority. He said, "I do not think we gave you that authority." She said, "Yes, you did, in the January meeting." He said, "I was not at the January meeting." She said, "Then you abstained and the motion passed." I asked the board members if they had a copy of the January minutes. They both said no. Angela said she would provide them after the hearing. I said that is not how hearings work. She said you can be mad or you can be compliant. Marcus leaned forward and said I watched her draw the chalk line on his driveway. There was no boundary violation before she made one up. Angela said he was not a credible witness because he was my friend. Marcus said I barely know him. I just live across the street and I do not like seeing people get harassed. One of the board members asked Angela if she drew a chalk line. She said I marked the boundary for clarity. He said with whose authority? She said my committee authority. He said, "Angela, that is not how this works." Angela stood up and said if the board was not going to support enforcement, she would resign and the neighborhood would fall apart. The board member said, "Sit down, we are not done." She sat. He asked me if I had documentation of the property line. I handed him the plat map and the emails from the management company. He read them, passed them to the other board member and said, "This looks pretty clear to me. His driveway is on his property." Angela said the emails are not official. He said they are from the management company, they are official enough. He asked Angela if she filed any of this through the proper violation process. She said the architectural committee has independent authority. He said, "Angela, we have talked about this. You cannot just tow people." Angela slammed her hand on the table and said, "I have been protecting property values while you two do nothing, and this is the thanks I get." The board member said, "We are not saying you are wrong to enforce rules. We are saying you have to follow process." She said, "Process takes too long." He said, "That is not your call." She said, "Then I resign effective immediately, and you can deal with the chaos." She stood up, grabbed her papers, and walked out. The two board members looked at each other. One of them said, "I am sorry you had to deal with that." I asked if my access would be restored. He said, "Yes, we will call the gate company right now." I left the clubhouse feeling like I had won, but I knew it was not over. Angela did not strike me as someone who quit. I got my gate access back that afternoon, and I went to work. When I came home that night, there was a new sticker on my car window. This one was red and said "Final Impound Notice" in big letters with no other readable text. I peeled it off and saved it. Angela was not on the board anymore, but she still had her label maker and her handheld scanner, and she still had the tow company on speed dial. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. A man said, "This is Derek from Elite Towing. I am calling about a vehicle at your address." I said I did not request a tow. He said the HOA did. I said the HOA does not have authority to tow from my property. He said I have a work order from Angela Williams. I said Angela Williams resigned from the board yesterday. He paused. He said she told me she was the architectural chair. I said she was, she is not anymore. He said, "Okay, I will call her back." I said, "Before you do, you should know she has been trying to tow me illegally for 2 weeks and the police have been involved." He said, "Thanks for letting me know," and he hung up. I called the management company and told them Angela was still trying to tow me. They said she no longer had authority and they would send her a cease and desist letter. I asked if that would stop her. They said probably not, but it would create a paper trail. I asked what else I could do. They said file a police report for harassment. I said I already did that. They said file another one. I hung up and called the police non-emergency line. I explained the situation and asked if I could get a restraining order. The dispatcher said I needed to go through the courts for that, but I could file another report, and if Angela showed up again, officers would respond faster. I filed the report. That afternoon, I was at work setting up for a corporate event when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He said Angela just pulled up to your house with a tow truck. I called him. He said she is standing in your driveway right now with a guy in a reflective vest, and they are looking at your car. I said take pictures and call the police. He said already done. I told my supervisor I had an emergency and I left. I broke every speed limit getting home. When I pulled up, there were 2 police cars in front of my house and a tow truck idling in the street. Angela was sitting in the back of one of the police cars. The tow operator was talking to an officer by his truck. Marcus was standing on his porch filming. I got out and walked over to the officer. He said, "You the homeowner?" I said, "Yes." He said, "She tried to have your car towed again." I said, "I know." He said, "We explained to her that she does not have authority, and if she tries again, she will be arrested for harassment." I asked if she understood. He said, "She said you are violating HOA rules and she has a duty to enforce them." I asked what happens now. He said, "We gave her a warning. If she comes back, we will arrest her." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Get a restraining order. This is not going to stop." I went inside and started researching restraining orders. I found out I could file for a temporary order based on harassment, and then there would be a hearing. The filing fee was $200. I did not have $200 without dipping into the money I owed my family. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop, trying to decide if I could justify the cost. Then my phone rang. It was the management company regional director. She said she had reviewed my file, and she was appalled at what had been happening. She said Angela Williams no longer had any authority in the HOA, and the board was voting tonight to formally remove her from all committees. She said they were also reviewing vendor contracts, because it appeared Angela had been directing tow companies to target specific residents without board approval. She asked if I would be willing to provide my documentation for their internal investigation. I said yes. She said they would also be filing a complaint with the towing company licensing board because the repeated attempts to tow from private property violated state law. I asked if that would stop Angela. She said it would not stop Angela, but it would stop the tow companies from responding to her. That night I got an email with the gate access audit log. I opened it and scrolled through 3 months of data. My access had been manually blocked on 17 different days, all of them days when I had early shifts or late shifts. The block was always placed by user A. Williams, and the block reason was listed as compliance hold. I printed the log and highlighted every block. Then I sent a copy to the management company with a note that said this is why I was late to shifts and why I had to park outside the gate. I also sent a copy to the 2 board members who were at the hearing. I did not send Angela a copy. I wanted her to think I did not have it. The next week was quiet. No tow trucks. No stickers. No Angela. I started to think maybe it was over. Then I got a call from my car insurance company. They said they received a claim from Maplewood Commons HOA for property damage related to my vehicle. I asked what damage. They said the claim stated my vehicle had damaged common area landscaping and the HOA was seeking $1,500 in reimbursement. I said that is not true. They said, "Do you have proof?" I said yes. I have photos of my driveway and there is no landscaping within 10 feet of my car. They said, "Send us the photos and we will deny the claim." I sent the photos. 2 days later, the insurance company called back and said the claim was denied and they had flagged the HOA for filing a fraudulent claim. They also said if the HOA kept filing false claims, the insurance carrier would drop Maplewood Commons entirely. I found out later that Angela had filed similar claims against 3 other residents. The insurance carrier sent a letter to the board saying they had 30 days to stop the fraudulent claims or the policy would be canceled. The board panicked because HOA insurance is legally required and losing it would mean the neighborhood could not operate. They held an emergency meeting and voted to ban Angela from all HOA property and all HOA business. They also voted to hire an attorney to investigate her conduct. I thought that was the end. It was not. 2 weeks later, I was leaving for work and I found a tow dolly wheel visible beside the curb in front of my house. I walked closer and saw it was attached to a small trailer. The trailer had a handwritten sign on it with no readable text, just big letters. I took a picture and called the police. They came out and ran the trailer plate. It was registered to Angela Williams. The officer said the trailer was not illegally parked, but it was suspicious. He said he would ask her to move it. I said she is going to say she is allowed to park here. He said technically she is. It is a public street. I said she is harassing me. He said I understand, but unless she breaks a law I cannot do anything. I called the management company. They said Angela no longer lived in Maplewood Commons. She had moved out 3 days ago. I asked where she went. They said they could not tell me. I asked if she still owned property here. They said no, she sold her unit. I asked why she was parked on my street. They said they did not know. I called the board president. He said Angela sold her unit and moved, but she left a forwarding address with the county for some kind of lawsuit she was filing. I asked what lawsuit. He said she was suing the HOA for wrongful removal and defamation. I asked if I was named. He said not yet, but she was claiming the board conspired with me to force her out. That night the trailer was still there. I went outside and looked closer. There was a laminated card zip-tied to the trailer hitch with no readable text. I took another picture. The next morning the trailer was gone. I checked my car. There was a new sticker on the windshield. This one said "You are not safe" in red marker with no other readable text. I called the police and filed another harassment report. They said they would increase patrols in the area. I said that is not enough. They said apply for the restraining order. I borrowed the $200 from my brother and filed for a temporary restraining order. The hearing was set for 10 days out. In the meantime, I kept going to work and coming home and checking my car every morning. The stickers kept appearing. Always at night. Always red marker. Always vague threats with no readable text. I started parking in my garage, but that did not stop her. She left stickers on my garage door. I installed a camera. The footage showed Angela walking up my driveway at 2 in the morning with her label maker and a roll of stickers. I sent the footage to the police. They said they would arrest her next time she showed up. The restraining order hearing happened on a Tuesday morning. Angela showed up with a binder full of documents. She told the judge I was a dangerous resident who had threatened her and violated HOA rules repeatedly. The judge asked for evidence of threats. She said I recorded her without consent. The judge said Washington is a two-party consent state. Do you have proof he recorded you without telling you? She said he pointed his phone at me. The judge said that is not a crime. She said he also conspired with the board to remove me from my position. The judge said that is not relevant to this hearing. She said he filed false police reports. The judge asked if I had been charged with filing false reports. I said no. The judge asked Angela if she had been charged with harassment. She said no. The judge said based on the evidence I am granting a temporary restraining order for 6 months. Angela is prohibited from coming within 500 feet of the petitioner or his property. Angela stood up and said this is a violation of my rights. The judge said you can appeal. Angela said I will. The judge said hearing is over. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could finally breathe. The restraining order meant Angela could not come near me or my house. It also meant if she tried, she would be arrested immediately. I went home and updated my camera to send alerts to my phone. I also sent a copy of the restraining order to the management company, the board, and the police department. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No stickers, no tow trucks, no Angela. I started to relax. Then I got a subpoena. Angela had filed a lawsuit against the HOA, the board, the management company, and me personally. She was seeking $100,000 in damages for wrongful termination, defamation, and emotional distress. The lawsuit claimed I had fabricated evidence and conspired with the board to destroy her reputation. It also claimed the gate access log I provided was forged. I called an attorney. The consultation was free. The attorney read the lawsuit and said it was frivolous, but I would still need to respond. He said his retainer was $5,000. I did not have $5,000. I asked if the HOA would cover it. He said, maybe, if the board agreed I was acting in their interest. I called the board president. He said the HOA attorney was already responding to the lawsuit and they would add me as a co-defendant under their coverage. I asked if that meant I did not need my own attorney. He said it meant the HOA attorney would represent both of us, but if there was a conflict of interest, I would need separate counsel. I said I could not afford separate counsel. He said, let us see how it plays out. The lawsuit dragged on for 3 months. Depositions. Interrogatories. Document requests. Angela kept filing motions claiming the HOA was hiding evidence and I was lying under oath. Every motion was denied. The judge finally set a hearing date to decide if the case would go to trial or be dismissed. The hearing was scheduled for late September. In the meantime, the board decided to do a full audit of the HOA finances. They hired a forensic accountant to review vendor contracts and payment records. The accountant found that Angela had been approving payments to Elite Towing without board authorization. Over the past 2 years, the HOA had paid Elite Towing $40,000 for tows that were never documented in violation reports. The accountant also found that Angela had a financial relationship with the owner of Elite Towing. They were related by marriage. The board voted to terminate the Elite Towing contract immediately and file a complaint with the state attorney general for fraud. The lawsuit hearing happened on a Thursday. Angela showed up with a new attorney. The HOA attorney presented the forensic audit and the gate access logs. He also presented affidavits from 3 other residents who had been targeted by Angela with fraudulent towing threats. Angela's attorney argued that the audit was retaliatory and the affidavits were hearsay. The judge read through the documents and said this case is dismissed with prejudice. Angela stood up and started yelling that the judge was biased. The judge said one more word, and you will be held in contempt. Angela sat down. The judge said the evidence shows a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority, and I am forwarding this matter to the state attorney general for further investigation. Case dismissed. I walked out of the courtroom and stood on the steps trying to process what had just happened. The HOA attorney shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, you are free." I asked what happens now. He said the attorney general will investigate and likely file charges. Angela could face fines or jail time for fraud. He said the HOA would also be filing a civil suit to recover the $40,000. I asked if I would get anything. He said probably not, but you are done dealing with her. The state attorney general filed charges 3 months later. Angela was charged with fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority. She pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 3 years probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and to the residents she had targeted. The tow company lost its license after the city found multiple violations of towing regulations. They refunded every resident who had been charged for an improper tow. The HOA held a special meeting to vote on new rules. They passed a resolution requiring all towing to be approved by a majority board vote with documented cause. They also passed a rule that any board member who abused their authority would be removed immediately and banned from future service. The meeting was packed. When the votes were read, Angela's name came up in the discussion. One of the residents said, "We need to make sure this never happens again." Another resident said Angela tried to bankrupt people over parking spots. She should never be allowed back. The board president said the new rules prevent that. Then someone in the back said, "Let's vote on a formal ban." The motion passed unanimously. The room laughed when the vote count was read because it was so lopsided. The board also changed the hearing rules so residents could not be railroaded. Every violation now required written notice, a 10-day response period, and a hearing with at least 2 board members present. The architectural committee was dissolved, and its duties were transferred to the full board. I stayed in Maplewood Commons for another year. I kept sending money to my family. I kept working events. I never saw Angela again. I heard she moved to another state and tried to join a different HOA board, but they rejected her application after running a background check. One night I was sitting on my porch and Marcus walked over. He said, "You know, I never thought I would see someone take down an HOA Karen like that." I said, "I did not take her down. She took herself down." He said, "Maybe, but you did not let her get away with it." I said I could not afford to. He said most people would have just moved. I said I thought about it, but I was tired of running. He nodded and said, "Well, the neighborhood is better now." I said I hope so. I still have the gate access log framed on my wall. I look at it sometimes and remember how close I came to losing everything over a chalk line and a grudge. I also remember that the only way to stop someone like Angela is to let her commit to the lie in public, then prove she was lying. I did not correct her lie because I wanted her to commit to it in public, and when she did, it destroyed her. I appreciate you being part of this.